Cabbage was the vegetable that never let a British family go hungry. A penny a head at the greengrocer's, it stretched across the week in pots, pans, and pie dishes, feeding the many on almost nothing, from broths that were little more than green water to hearty suppers that fought back against the cold. These 25 forgotten cabbage dinners carried working households through rationing and lean years. Expect thrift, invention, and flavors conjured from scraps. Which humble dish tops the list? Let's begin our countdown at number 25. Number 25. Kettle broth was cabbage at its most desperate, a supper conjured from almost nothing at all. When the cupboard held little more than a stump of cabbage and a heel of stale bread, housewives boiled the leaves hard in salted water, then poured the pale green liquor over torn bread in a bowl. A knob of dripping, if any could be spared, floated on top. In the hungry years before the war, and again through rationing, kettle broth appeared on tables across the West Country and the industrial North, costing barely a farthing to make. Children supped it hot on winter nights, the bread swelling soft in the broth, while mothers kept the boiled leaves back for the following day. Oral histories recall it as the taste of hard times, thin and comforting at once. It filled the belly when nothing else could. Number 24. Cabbage and dripping turned the humblest greens into something rich enough to carry a meal. After Sunday's roast, the dripping jar held golden fat flecked with meat juices, and no scrap was ever wasted. Housewives shredded a whole cabbage, then fried it slow in a spoonful of that beef dripping until the edges caught and crisped and the kitchen filled with a savory roasting smell. Salt, pepper, and nothing more. In the 1950s, a cabbage cost only a few pence, and the dripping was free, saved from the joint. Served alongside a slice of cold meat or simply piled on bread, it was a supper that tasted of Sunday long after the beef was gone. Children who wrinkled their noses at plain boiled cabbage cleared their plates of this. The fat carried the flavor, and thrift never tasted so good. Number 23. Fried cabbage and onions was the weeknight answer to an empty larder, a dish that asked for pennies and gave back warmth. Housewives sliced onions thin, softened them in a little lard until sweet and golden, then threw in shredded cabbage and let the whole lot fry down together, hissing and steaming in the pan. A crack of pepper lifted it, and a splash of the cabbage water kept it from catching. By the early 1950s, this appeared on tables in terraced streets across the Midlands, a filling side that could stretch to a supper when meat was dear. Children remember the smell drifting up the stairs, sharp and sweet at once. Served with a fried slice or a spoon of mash, it turned two cheap vegetables into something that satisfied. It was frugality made flavorful, the sort of cooking that wasted not a single leaf. Number 22. Cabbage and pearl barley broth was the slow, thrifty pot that simmered all day at the back of the range. Housewives measured out a handful of pearl barley, cheap and filling, then added shredded cabbage, an onion, a carrot, and whatever bone the butcher would spare for a penny or two. Hours of gentle cooking swelled the barley soft and turned the pot thick and cloudy, the cabbage melting into the broth until scarcely a leaf remained whole. By 1953, barley broth of this kind fed families across Scotland and the north, a single pot stretching to feed 6 with bread on the side. The smell, earthy and green, seeped through cold kitchens on wash day. Children spooned it up thick, mothers topped the pot for the next day, and fathers swore it warmed a man to his boots. It was patience turned into supper. Number 21. Cabbage and split pea pottage carried the taste of thrift. From the cottage hearth to the industrial terrace, housewives soaked yellow split peas overnight, then simmered them for hours with shredded cabbage, an onion, and a scrap of bacon rind until the peas collapsed into a thick golden mush studded with green. The dish cost only pennies, the peas a few pence a pound, and the cabbage cheaper still, yet it filled a family through the leanest weeks. In the 1950s, pottage of this kind appeared on tables where meat was a rare visitor, its dense, savory body enough to silence the hungriest child. The smell of simmering pulses hung in the air long after the pot was scraped clean. Mothers served it with hunks of bread, fathers ate it in near silence after a shift, and nothing was ever thrown away. It was survival, thick and green. Number 20. The cabbage and lentil pot was the meatless supper that kept families fed when the purse ran empty. Housewives tipped a cup of brown lentils into the pan, cheap and nourishing, then added shredded cabbage, onion, and a spoon of dripping for richness, simmering the lot until the lentils turned soft and the cabbage melted down to nothing. A pinch of pepper and a bay leaf were the only luxuries. By the mid-1950s, lentil and cabbage pots fed households across the country on days when wages had not yet come, costing barely a shilling to fill a family pot. The dish was plain, but it satisfied, its earthy warmth cutting through the damp of a coal-fired kitchen. Children ate it without complaint on the promise of pudding to come. Mothers valued it for its cheapness, fathers for its heft. It was the quiet backbone of the meatless week. Number 19. Soused cabbage brought a sharp, welcome bite to the winter table, a way of keeping the glut of autumn long into the cold months. Housewives shredded firm white cabbage fine, packed it into stone jars with salt, then poured over spiced vinegar, boiled with peppercorns and a little sugar. Left to steep for a week or more, the cabbage turned crisp, sour, and bright, ready to cut through the fat of cold meat and dripping. In the 1950s, a jar of soused cabbage stood in nearly every pantry, its keen tang a relief from endless boiled greens. Children pulled faces at the vinegar smell, but adults piled it onto bread and cheese or beside a slice of brawn. It cost next to nothing, and lasted for weeks without a fridge. It was thrift with a sharp edge, the taste of a larder that never went bare. Number 18. Cabbage and haricot beans was the filling. Frugal supper that turned a bag of dried beans into a proper meal. Housewives soaked the small white beans overnight, then simmered them for hours with shredded cabbage, onion, and a scrap of bacon until the beans turned creamy and the cabbage soft. A little bicarbonate of soda in the pot sped the beans along and softened their skins. In the early 1950s, a pound of dried haricots cost about a shilling and could feed a family across several meals, cabbage stretching each pot further still. The dish was plain but nourishing, its mild, buttery beans a welcome change from endless pulses. Children ate it up with bread to mop the pot. Mothers valued it for its thrift, and fathers found it stuck to the ribs through a long shift. It was cheap protein made warming, nothing wasted, every belly filled. Number 17. Braised red cabbage was the jewel bright side that brought color to gray winter tables. Housewives shredded the deep purple leaves, layered them in a heavy pot with sliced apple, an onion, a spoon of sugar, and a good splash of vinegar. Then let the lot cook down slow until soft, sweet, and glossy. The vinegar held the color bright while the apple lent a gentle sweetness. By the 1950s, braised red cabbage appeared beside pork and sausages on Sunday tables, its sharp, sweet richness cutting through fatty meat. The smell of vinegar and spice filled the kitchen as it stewed for an hour or more. Children were drawn to its startling color, mothers to the way a single cabbage stretched across a family. It kept well, tasting better warmed through the next day. It was thrift dressed up as something festive, a splash of color in lean times. Number 16. Creamed cabbage lifted the plainest of greens into something soft and comforting, with nothing more than flour, milk, and butter. Housewives boiled the cabbage until just tender, drained it well, then folded it through a simple white sauce, loosened with a little of the cooking water and seasoned with pepper and a scrape of nutmeg. The result was mild, creamy, and gentle, a way of making cabbage welcome even to those who dreaded it boiled. In the 1950s, creamed cabbage appeared beside boiled ham and mashed potato on kitchen tables across Britain, the sauce stretching a small cabbage to feed the whole family. Children who pushed plain greens around their plates ate this without a murmur. Mothers made the sauce in the same pan to save washing up, and nothing was ever wasted. It was humble cabbage softened into comfort, thrift dressed in a smooth white coat. Number 15. The cabbage. Cheese bake turned a cheap vegetable and a scrap of cheese into a supper worth coming home to. Housewives boiled wedges of cabbage until tender, laid them in a dish, then smothered them in a cheese sauce made from a little grated cheddar, melted into flour and milk. A scatter of breadcrumbs on top, browned crisp under the grill. By the 1950s, this baked supper appeared on meatless days across the country, the sharp tang of cheese making even the plainest greens a treat. A heel of cheese too small for anything else found new life here. The smell of browning cheese drew children to the kitchen door. Mothers served it hot with bread and butter, stretching a few ounces of cheddar across the whole family. It cost pennies, yet felt like plenty. It was cabbage disguised as indulgence, thrift with a golden crust. Number 14. Cabbage and potato cakes made a virtue of yesterday's leftovers, frying cold scraps into something crisp and new. Housewives mashed leftover boiled potato with chopped cooked cabbage, bound it with a little flour, then shaped the mixture into flat cakes and fried them in dripping until golden and crusted on both sides. Salt, pepper, and a hot pan were all it took. In the 1950s, these cakes turned the tail end of a meal into a fresh supper, costing nothing but the fat to fry them. The edges crisped dark while the middle stayed soft and green-flecked. Children fought over the crunchiest cakes, straight from the pan and still spitting. Mothers made them on Mondays from Sunday's greens. Fathers ate them with a fried egg on top. Nothing from the weekend went to waste. It was leftovers reborn, humble scraps fried into something everyone wanted. Number 13. The cabbage pasty carried the taste of thrift in a fold of pastry, a portable supper that filled a working man's pocket. Housewives rolled out short crust, piled the center with shredded cabbage, onion, and a little potato, seasoned it well with pepper, then sealed and baked the parcel until the pastry turned golden and the filling steamed soft inside. In the mining villages of the West Country and Wales, cabbage pasties fed men underground when meat could not be spared, costing only pennies to make a batch. The pastry kept the filling warm for hours, and the crimped edge served as a handle for grimy hands. Children carried them to school wrapped in cloth, the smell of onion and pastry filling the satchel. Mothers baked them by the dozen on baking day. It was a meatless pasty born of necessity, thrift you could hold in one hand. Number 12. Buttered Savoy cabbage with nutmeg was the plain green given a touch of quiet elegance. Housewives chose the crinkled, dark-leaved Savoy, prized for its sweetness through the frost, shredded it fine, and boiled it briefly before tossing it with a knob of precious butter and a fine grating of nutmeg. The warm spice lifted the cabbage from ordinary to something almost refined. By the 1950s, this appeared beside the Sunday roast in homes that took pride in their greens, the nutmeg a small luxury from the back of the spice cupboard. The Savoy held its shape and its flavor where other cabbages turned to mush. Children were coaxed to eat their greens by the sweetness the butter brought. Mothers served it glistening in a warmed dish, a simple side done properly. It cost little, yet felt considered. It was cabbage treated with care, thrift with a touch of grace. Number 11. Stuffed cabbage parcels stretched a scrap of mince across a whole family in the cleverest way. Housewives blanched large outer leaves until soft, then wrapped them around a filling of minced meat bulked out with rice, onion, and breadcrumbs, before simmering the little parcels in a thin tomato or gravy sauce until tender. A pound of mince padded with rice and cabbage could feed 6 with ease. In the post-war years, these parcels appeared where families had learned to make a little meat go a long way, the cabbage doing the work of stretching the meal. The parcels arrived at the table plump and glistening, the sauce spooned generously over. Children unwrapped them with curiosity, mothers took pride in the neat folding, and fathers found them surprisingly filling. It was invention born of scarcity, a way of turning 1 pound of mince into a supper for all. Number 10. Cabbage and dumplings brought heft to the pot when meat was scarce and appetites were large. Housewives simmered shredded cabbage with onion and a little bacon in a thin broth, then dropped in balls of suet dough that swelled and steamed on the surface until light and dense at once. The dumplings soaked up the savory liquor, turning a thin pot into a filling supper. By 1953, suet dumplings padded out countless cheap dishes, a handful of flour and suet costing only pennies, yet doubling what a pot could feed. The lid rattled gently as the dumplings rose, a sound that meant tea was near. Children fished for the softest dumpling, mothers stretched a scant broth into a meal, and fathers ate their fill before a long shift. It was cabbage made hearty, the calorie workhorse of the lean kitchen, turning greens into a proper supper. Number 9. Cabbage and mutton stew coaxed richness from the cheapest cut of meat the butcher sold. Housewives bought scrag end of mutton, fatty and tough, for $1 or so a pound, then simmered it for hours with cabbage, onion, and barley until the meat fell from the bone and the broth turned deep and savory. The cabbage melted into the pot, thickening the liquor and stretching the meat across the whole family. In the 1950s, stews like this anchored winter tables in the north and the valleys, where cheap cuts and long cooking were a way of life. The smell of simmering mutton filled the terrace by late afternoon. Children fished for the softest meat, mothers skimmed the fat for dripping, and fathers came home from the pit to a bowl that warmed them through. It was tough meat made tender, cabbage turning scarcity into a Sunday feeling on a Tuesday. Number 8. The cabbage and sausage supper was the cheerful weeknight meal that made a few bangers feed everyone. Housewives fried sausages until browned, then nestled them into a bed of shredded cabbage and onion softened in the same pan, letting the sausage fat flavor the greens as they cooked down together. A handful of sausages, stretched across a mound of cabbage, could satisfy a whole family. By the 1950s, this appeared on tables when the meat ration was thin, the cheap sausage doing just enough to lift out the humble cabbage. The smell of frying bangers drew children to the table before they were called. Mothers served it with mash or bread to fill the gaps. Fathers claimed the crispest sausage, and every plate was cleared. It cost little yet felt like a proper meal. It was thrift with a bit of cheer, cabbage and cheap meat turned into comfort. Number 7. Corned beef and cabbage leaned on the tin in the cupboard to turn a cheap vegetable into a hearty supper. Housewives boiled wedges of cabbage until soft, then folded through slabs of tinned corned beef shipped by the ton from Argentina, sometimes frying the lot into a hash with leftover potato. The salty, dense beef seasoned the greens through and through. In the early 1950s, a tin of corned beef was insurance against lean days in homes where fresh meat was scarce, its long shelf life a comfort in a time before reliable fridges. The sharp metallic tang was unmistakable as the pan heated. Children wrinkled their noses, mothers stretched a single tin to feed 5, and fathers accepted it as the price of a full plate. It was the global pantry meeting the kitchen garden, cabbage, and cheap tinned meat, feeding a nation through its hungriest years. Number 6. Cawl crowned the Welsh table as a broth. So nourishing it carried families through the hardest winters. Housewives filled a heavy pot with a scrap of bacon or cheap beef, leeks, potatoes, swede, and a good head of cabbage, then simmered the lot for hours until the kitchen filled with a warm, savory steam. The cabbage softened into the broth, lending it body and a sweet green depth. In the mining valleys and hill farms of Wales, Cawl was more than a meal, served with hunks of bread and often a wedge of cheese after long days of labor. By 1955, it appeared on tables from Snowdonia to the valleys, a single pot feeding a household for 2 days as the flavor deepened. Children soaked their bread in the broth, mothers topped the pot to feed all, and fathers returned from the pit grateful for its warmth. It was thrift turned into tradition. Number 5. Rumbledethumps carried the taste of the Scottish borders, a homely bake that turned humble scraps into comfort. Housewives mashed together boiled potato and cooked cabbage or kale, folded in softened onion and a knob of butter, piled the lot into a dish, then scattered grated cheese on top and baked it until golden and bubbling. The name itself, all thumps and rumbles, spoke of the mashing and mixing that made it. In the 1950s, Rumbledethumps fed farming families across the borders, a supper conjured from the garden and the tail end of a meal for barely a few pence. The smell of browning cheese and buttery greens filled the cold kitchen. Children scraped the crisp edges from the dish. Mothers made it from Sunday's leftovers, and fathers found it stuck to the ribs. It was the Scottish cousin of every leftover supper, thrift-baked golden and shared warm. Number 4. Cabbage and ham hock broth was the rich, smoky pot that a single cheap joint could carry for days. Housewives bought a ham hock for coppers, that knuckle of gristle and meat the butcher near gave away, then simmered it for hours with cabbage, onion, and a handful of split peas or barley until the meat fell from the bone. The hock lent its salt and smoke to every ladle, while the cabbage thickened the broth to something that clung to the spoon. In the 1950s, broth of this kind fed mining and factory families across the north and the valleys. A pot rarely emptied, but simply topped up by the fireside. The smell drifted through the terrace on wash day. Children dipped bread into the thick green liquor, mothers shredded the last of the meat back into the pot, and fathers swore it was the best fuel for a shift. It was one cheap bone stretched into a week of warmth. Number 3. Colcannon brought a rare touch of celebration to the plainest of kitchens, a dish where cabbage and potato became something greater than the sum of their pennies. Housewives mashed floury potatoes with butter and milk, then folded through cooked cabbage or curly kale, and a scatter of softened spring onion until the whole mound turned pale green and fluffy. A well pressed into the top held a pool of melting butter. In the 1950s, Colcannon appeared on tables across Wales, the borders and beyond, its simple richness a comfort after a hard day. On special nights, a coin might be hidden in the mash for a lucky child to find. The smell of butter and greens filled the kitchen as it was piled steaming into a warmed dish. Children dug for the butter first, mothers took pride in a light, fluffy mash, and fathers cleared their plates. It was thrift made joyful. Number 2. Boiled bacon and cabbage. Stood as the centerpiece of the mid-week table, a dish that stretched a single joint into meals for days. Housewives soaked a cheap bacon collar or hock overnight to draw out the salt, then simmered it for hours with onions and carrots before wedging a whole cabbage around the joint to cook in the smoky, savory liquor. The greens drank in the flavor of the meat, turning soft, salty, and rich. By 1954, bacon joints sold briskly at butcher counters, their low price making them the affordable anchor of the working-class week. Children watched the pot bubble as the cabbage turned sweet. Fathers carved the joint with quiet ceremony, and the cold meat stretched into sandwiches for days. The cooking liquor became soup by Thursday. Nothing was wasted, nothing was thrown away. It was Cabbage at its most generous, a whole week of suppers from a single pot. And finally, in first place, Bubble and Squeak crowned the humble Cabbage as the undisputed champion of British thrift. The name came from the sound itself, the vegetables hissing and squeaking as they hit the hot pan, a reminder that in a post-war kitchen, nothing ever went to waste. Housewives gathered the cold potato and boiled cabbage left from Sunday's roast, mashed them together with a stray carrot or onion, then fried the lot in dripping until the edges crisped dark and golden. The smell of frying greens filled the kitchen on Monday mornings across the land. Diaries from the era record the ritual with weary affection, the same supper week after week, yet not a scrap ever left behind. Children argued over the crispest brown bits, mothers made a fresh meal from tired leftovers, and fathers swore the burnt edges were the finest part. Ministry of Food campaigns held it up as the very model of economy. But for most families it was simply the way things were done. A second life for the greens that had already served their turn. Today, Bubble and Squeak survives mostly as a side, cooked fresh out of nostalgia rather than necessity. But once it was the main event, the crowning glory of the cabbage table, a supper that turned the tail end of the week into something everyone fought over. It was making do turned into a treasure, the quiet pride of making something from nothing, and the truest taste of a Britain that wasted not a single leaf. Across all 25 dishes, from the thin kettle broth that opened our list to the triumphant Bubble and Squeak at the very top, one humble vegetable tells the whole story of British thrift. Cabbage cost pennies, kept through the cold, and stretched to fill every seat at the table, whether padded with barley, wrapped around a scrap of mince, or fried crisp from Sunday's leftovers. These forgotten suppers were more than recipes. They were the taste of a generation that wasted nothing, made do with little, and found warmth around the table against the odds.